And we're back, and as promised, we have our special guest, Brian Herritt. And Brian, we want to hear a little bit about your background. You're a retired police officer from the San Diego area, but you've been very busy. Tell us about what you've been doing. You're not exactly retired.
No, ma'am. I actually retired about 7 years ago. Since that time, I worked for a while for the County of San Bernardino. I worked for Legoland, California, and most recently I'm the manager of public safety at the Saboba Indian Reservation. So that's my full-time day job.
Okay, but you have, in addition to that, sort of a passion. You have a son with autism. Tell us a little bit about him.
We call him Little Brian, although he's probably bigger than me now.
Okay.
He is 16 years old. He's really kind of our whole family's our inspiration, I guess. Started my journey with autism. He was a little under 2 years old when he was diagnosed with, at that time, what they told us was severe low-functioning autism. It took me about 1.5 years to realize that there was a real need for training with law enforcement because my cop buddies and I didn't understand. And I knew when he was diagnosed, I didn't know anything about autism. I didn't know what autism was.
And so this is a passion of yours now, trying to help other police and first responders to understand what this is and how they need to conduct themselves in the face of dealing with someone on the spectrum.
Absolutely. I think cops, you know, all of us want to help people as law enforcement officers. The sad part is that there is no training for us in what is autism and how to deal with it. And then when officers are responding to residences or running into people on the street with autism, there is no reference material or how to do that. And so many families like mine, we struggle, you know, we still have our struggles.
Yes.
You know, and with Brian being 6 foot tall and 230 pounds and my wife being much smaller than that, you know, he can get you know, aggressive, and we looked at what's going to happen when law enforcement comes to my front door, and what do we do? And that started with a passion project for me to train. We looked at every person that we thought Brian would run into and could I help train them about Brian, and that's kind of over the last 9 years that I've been doing this turned into, I think every person with autism is my kid. So I'm training the whole country, or doing what I can to train as many cops and first responders as I can.
What do you see as some of the biggest issues? Besides, obviously, aggression can be a big issue, but what are some of the other issues?
Aggression is a huge one. What it really comes down to is for cops is what are their options. I mean, it's one thing for the younger age children, it's the elopement issue, it's them getting away, but when you get into you know, when they 16, 17, or even adulthood, it's what do law enforcement do with somebody with autism when they're having a meltdown or when they're in a crisis situation? Because, you know, there really isn't a magical place to take people to calm them down and bring them back. And it's really just a lack of knowledge of what autism is and what resources are available and what can they do in the field to kind of handle a situation, because there are no resources.
Absolutely. And there's two sides to this coin. On the one hand, there's, you know, informing the police and first responders about how to behave. But then there's the other side, that as part of the autism community, we have a responsibility too. What do you see that you wish the autism community knew about dealing with first responders?
It's funny that you say that, because when I go out and I teach an agency, what I usually do is I hold a free night with that agency, whatever state it is, whatever city, and we invite the local autism community to bring their loved ones and them out, and I have them kind of intermingle with law enforcement. My wife came up with this quote that I think is brilliant, which is, we call it, we bridge the gap. We're bridging the gap between law enforcement and autism, and a big part of that is the families. And when I talk to families and I do that family presentation, it's teaching them, one, I want them to understand what a police officer, when they first get to their house, what their perception is and how they're seeking control, which for a lot of families, and even my own, there's some times where we don't have control.
Right.
So when you have a law enforcement officer step in your home and he's trying to get something that you as a parent can't even attain, it's a very stressful situation even for the officer. So I try to give them some insight into the officers, and I also try to let them know that officers don't have any training. And it's really hard for cops because we really can't show up at things and say, hey, I don't know what I'm doing.
Right.
You have to know. Yeah, you You have to know what you're doing, and if you don't, you have to fake it.
Right.
So what I really want parents to understand is, if they approach it the right way, and I give them some tips on how to talk to cops, the cops will gladly accept that information. It's just how it's brought to them.
Well, tell us a tip. What can we do?
There's several. I think the first thing is disclosure. I think is the most important thing for a family.
Okay.
Is how do you get that disclosure? If they're there, it's even yelling, "Hey, he has autism. He has autism. He has autism." If it's carrying some sort of ID card that says, "Hey, I have autism. These are tips." Registries in San Diego County, we have the Take Me Home program, we borrowed the name from a gentleman named Jimmy Donahoe in Florida. But that Take Me Home program provides all that information to law enforcement before they even get to a residence.
Okay.
That disclosure, I tell parents, go to your local police station, and then people listening, do that tomorrow. If their local law enforcement don't know, wherever they're at, go to the police station with your loved one with autism, ask to talk to a sergeant. When they come up, say, "Hey, this is my loved one. We live in your city. I want you to know this is where we lived. This is my loved one. He doesn't like loud sounds. He doesn't like bright lights. If you see him, he sometimes takes his clothes off." Whatever those situations are, let law enforcement know before it becomes a problem. Same thing with your local firefighters. Go knock on the firefighter's door. Tell the firefighters, same thing.
Yeah.
Because you want them to have that information before they get there, so they know they're not dealing with somebody who's on drugs or somebody who's got something else going on, and they understand what they're dealing with.
I gotta say, we did that when Jem was little. Did you? Our team, our
went to
ABA,
the
we went to the
Area
police
Safety-
department and we
really?
went to the fire department. We took a field trip
Right.
and went and we called ahead, and they all said, come, but know that if something's happening, we'll ask you to come back another time.
Right.
Right.
And we toured. He got to put on the jacket and sit in the fire truck.
great.
He was thrilled and was never afraid of a fireman after that. The police, it was a little dicier because I made a mistake and I took him to the police department then another time when they were doing their haunted house fundraiser, and he associated it with really scary stuff,
Right.
and that was hard to change. But he was happy to talk to the police officers outside the police station and had no fear of that. And I thought that was a really but I didn't come up with it. Our team said, let's do this. This is a really important
And
thing.
there was another, you brought up a fact that it was just a phone call I received yesterday from a school resource officer down in my area, who told me that he was involved in an incident with a child with autism who's going to school, and he had never spoken to the parents. And that's another thing I teach is if you have children that go to public or charter school in a city, just about every department has school resource officers, and you should know who they are.
Yeah.
And you should take the time for you as a parent to meet the school resource officers, and then have them meet your loved one and say, "Hey, this is what upsets them. This is what calms them down. This is what a meltdown looks like. This is how we bring them out of one. These are the tips that work for us at home," because it's your child's safety.
And I mean, there's a life at stake in some cases. We've seen this from time to time. So
Absolutely.
take the time. Don't wait for somebody to come and do this for you. Take the time to do it for yourself as a parent. Talk to us about your upcoming projects.
I'm working on several. I was contacted actually about a year ago by a really good company called Blue 360 Media, and they came to me because what they do is they provide training publications and reference publications to law enforcement. And they reached out to me and said, "Hey, we saw your website. We really want to reach out to the special needs community and come up with some in-print stuff for law enforcement for the special needs community." And I've had a really good relationship with them. I'm actually in the process of writing a reference manual for law enforcement and first responders.
And where will that be distributed?
It'll be on their website. We're still at the point now where my editors, I love my editors to death, but they're digging through it, and they're trying to do that. I'm also working on doing some search and rescue, a search and rescue manual as well because of the elopement issue.
Right.
I've done a lot of presentations for search and rescue, and also done quite a bit for hostage negotiators.
Really?
Because
Hostage-
what it's turning into for law enforcement is when you have a 17, 18, 19, even an adult with special needs who's in a home and being aggressive, that's not the police jargon. If they're in there alone, we call that a barricaded subject, or
Right.
a person that's violent that's in a home. So how do they communicate with them? And they're coming to me because they want to learn.
Right.
Because how do you communicate with somebody who, based on their special need, it's a communication disorder.
Right.
So if communication is so critical, how do they do that? So I'm working on a search and rescue thing. We're also working on some tips and tools that we can maybe give officers in the field to help them out. So I'm really excited to work with Blue 360. I think it's going to be a great thing that I know officers want to have.
Okay, very exciting.
Tell us how we can reach you, or how anybody in the public can reach you if they're interested in
The
knowing
easiest way is to go to autismcop.com. That's my website that's been put together. That's on there. It's got it's got my phone number on it. You can go through there. I also have a Facebook page. If you go to Autism Cop, you can follow me on there. But I have my phone number, my email address are out there. My wife, my family are very supportive of what we do, and they understand what we do. So I get phone calls all the time, and they know it kind of takes away from some family time, but we look at the bigger picture of who we're helping out.
Right.
So
Okay, well,
the website's the number one way.
Well, it's great work you're doing. We want to thank you for it.
Absolutely.
Thank you for-
Encourage people, if to have you come and do an event.
Absolutely. I mean, if it's local, I don't charge anything for family events. If they're local, law enforcement agencies is where I really, it is something I charge for, but I'm sure there's a lot of people that watch your show that will look at it that have uncles, brothers, friends that are law enforcement, and if they haven't been trained, it's really a matter of you got to have the right people trained.
Absolutely.
What a lot of people don't know is currently in California, at least, law enforcement officers, there is no requirement for training on autism. And of the special needs training they get, which the last time I checked, I think was 4 hours of total training, there's one question about autism. So those officers leave. And now when many moons ago, back when I say cops rode on horseback, when I started my career 19 years ago, there was 90 minutes of training. That was it on all special needs. And most of that was on blind and deaf. There wasn't anything on autism at all.
Well, and it's scary because we've seen time and time again that there is training for first responders on dealing with a drug addict, because we have a huge drug problem
Absolutely.
in our country. And so they're given training on that, which means that they've got it uppermost in their mind when they come to a site. They're looking and trying to identify, do I have a drug addict?
Right.
Which often can, if you aren't aware of the other,
Right.
A person with autism can be
Can present that
mistaken
way, right.
as being and we've seen terrible things happen as a
Yes.
result of that. From, there's the video of the kid playing with the string, and the law
Arizona.
enforcement, yes, and the law enforcement person who had just been trained in recognizing drug behavior, God bless him, because I'm sure, if somebody just says to you, white elephant, white elephant, white
Right,
elephant, and
right.
you walk in a room and you see something big and white, you're going to think white elephant.
Right.
And this poor kid is playing with the string, but he saw a drug addict.
Right.
Right.
And it had terrible, at
Consequences,
least
yeah.
he survived.
And in
but
that video, he gets out of the car, and the first thing he says to the officer says to him is, "What are you doing?" And he says, "Stemming."
Yes.
Yeah.
That officer had no idea
Yes.
what
What
even
that
stemming
meant.
None.
was.
Yeah.
No idea.
And that's one of the things I teach is the word meltdown, the word stemming, the word fascinations. What do fascinations mean? What are negative triggers?
Yes.
Those types of things officers need to know.
Yeah.
A lot of those calls that you're talking about, though, with the public, it's what does the public perceive? Now, we are parents of children with autism, so you, like me and my wife go out, we can spot somebody with autism a mile away, and we know
right.
the behaviors. But our neighbors probably wouldn't. And when the neighbors call, what do they see? Now, when my son Brian, when he's stemming or when he's aggressive, I could see how somebody who didn't know him or know he has autism would say he's on drugs.
Right.
It's
And a
understandable.
lot of times when the public calls in, I'll tell you as a cop, the most common suspicious person call we get is when the public calls us, say, "Hey, there's a person in my neighborhood, this is what he's looking like, he's on drugs."
Right.
So now when the officer's responding, they've got in the back of their mind that, hey,
Right.
this guy's on drugs.
Right.
So a big part of what I try to teach too is cops really kind of slowing down.
Yeah.
You get taught really quick in law enforcement that you have to go fast. You make decisions, your life and death decisions, everything is fast. What I try to teach them is slow everything down.
Yeah.
I want you to park in your car and look at that person for a while. That young man who was stemming with the string.
Yeah.
I wanted that officer to sit there and watch, because if he would have watched him for another maybe a minute and a half, maybe he would have saw something that's, hey, this kid's not huffing paint. Maybe this kid's got some kind of issue or other type of issue.
Right.
But we're so used to and ingrained in going fast, but everything with autism is go slow and be patient and de-escalate and sensory
Yes.
and all of those other factors that go with it. And that's totally against what cops are trained to do.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad that you're out there training people. Again, it's autismcop.com,
Yes, ma'am.
correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And that's where you can reach him, invite him to come to a family event, and call your local police department and say, do you have the training? Because if you don't, here's this guy who will do it.
And most of them know. California, at least they do, and across the country. I've been numerous states across the country, and if a family wants to bring it, or a parent wants to bring it to the local department, have them get a hold of me. I'll help them.
There you
Okay.
go.
I'm more than willing to call the department and say, hey, this is a group that's looking at doing this. Can we make this happen?
There you go.
And I'm more than willing to do that.
And you're
Right.
one of them, so I'm sure that they appreciate that.
That's, I think, what makes it successful is I think what makes it successful for cops is I actually open up for the first half hour of talking about when we learned Brian had autism and me being depressed. And I talk about the divorce rate amongst families of kids with autism. And I
Right.
talk about how I couldn't talk to my wife about it. And I still struggle with talking about it, to be honest with you. I can talk about Brian in a room full of all kinds of people, but if
Right.
you sit me aside and talk about him, I struggle with it.
How is
I
Brian
do.
doing now?
He is phenomenal. They say he's still nonverbal, but actually just yesterday he told my wife Linda, "I'm talking a lot lately."
Oh, that's
And
great.
he kind of pitched it together. But he is phenomenal. I have 3 wonderful kids. My 19-year-old son Vinny, does a great job with Brian and has been there with Brian through epilepsy and shares a room with him and does all that. And you guys have met Izzy.
Yes,
She's awesome.
right.
Yeah, Izzy is, like I tell people, is the best little sister a child with autism could have. So I have a great family. My wife gave up her career, gave up her life to really kind of take care of my kids. And I'm indebted forever for that.
Okay.
I mean,
Awesome.
I have the easy job. She's got the much tougher job than me.
But it's wonderful that you're paying it forward. That's an
trying,
amazing thing.
trying.
Okay,
Well, thank you, Brian.
autismcop.com.
Thank you guys for having me. I appreciate
Thank you.
it.
Now we're going to take a break, and we're going to come back. We have yet another guest.
Gabriel Kaplan Mayer.
Yes, and so that's going to be wonderful.
Okay.
Don't go anywhere.